Ask Reddit, what's the most unsettling/unexplainable thing that's ever happened to you? It happened to me last night. Friend A was sloppy drunk and had just broken up with his girlfriend. Friend B steps outside for a smoke and we follow. Friend A with no warning proceeds to his mom's car, grabs a pistol, and shoots himself in the head right in front of us. Smelling the smoke from the gun, watching him do it, and hearing his mom's screams when she saw are the most unsettling thing I've ever seen to date. Sorry, it's not unexplainable. Rented a basement with a constantly running, overfilling toilet just to find out the owner's mother had drowned her disabled baby in it 20 or so years prior. I bought my camper and moved out 2 days later. In high school, I was asleep in a second period class. It was early and the teacher didn't care. The bell went off and I immediately got out of the room on my way to meet my girlfriend at the time. Saw her, said hello, the usual, then hurried to my third period before the bell rang again. Got to the classroom and it wasn't my class. Teacher said I was early, looked at the clock and sure enough, it was the start of second period. Hurried back, went back to sleep. Didn't hit me until later just how strange it was. The second is a bit more bizarre. Right around the same time as the first story, I had a dream that I got hit by a commuter train on some tracks right in the middle of my town. As I was laying there injured and apparently dying, my girlfriend, same one as above, was holding me and the song "Where Oh Where Can My Baby Be?" was playing in the background. I eventually woke up to a call from her, asking if I wanted to go with her and her sister to a food festival that happened annually in town, which was coincidental because that's right where I was dying in my dream. I agreed to go and quickly told her about my dream and how intense it was. We had a laugh and I got ready. After they picked me up, we made our way into town and parked. As we were walking, I started to hear it. A band that was playing in one of the music tents was playing that song. The very same song from my dream. I remember grabbing my GF's arm and being like, whoa. Just kind of thinking it was a crazy coincidence. She realized what I was on about and also chuckled at the randomness. Just then, as we were standing there just being a little weirded out, we heard the dinging of the railroad crossing. The fest was on either side of the tracks and the train ran practically right through it. The train went through the fest at the exact time the band was playing the song from my dream. The two of us would talk about that day for years to come, even after we stopped dating. My mother and I went to see a psychic when I was 19. I was pretty skeptical, but she didn't want to go alone, and said she'd pay for a reading if I came along. My father had just died, and I knew my mother was pretty vulnerable to have come up with an idea like this, so I did. My mom went first, and I sat in the waiting area for over an hour, super bored. This was pre-smartphones. I was really impatient and annoyed by the time my turn finally came around. I already thought the psychic was a fraud, and I laughed outright when I entered her dim, candlelit, smoky, incense-filled little psychic cove. The psychic proceeds to ask me what type of reading I want, and I pick a tarot one because it's the cheapest and I feel bad that my mother is wasting money on this type of crap. I make sure to keep my body language really neutral and respond to questions with the minimal amount of information possible, age, date of birth, etc. I shuffle the cards, the psychic casts the reading and starts telling me stuff. Says she sees a move, new relationship, blah, 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 things that you could reasonably predict for any 19-year-old girl. She then gets to a specific card and gets all dramatic. She gets very still and looks at me with a super serious and intense expression. Goody. I'm getting my mother's money's worth. She asks me if I'm pregnant or had a miscarriage recently. I kind of roll my eyes and say no. Still really intense. She tells me that the cards indicate that something terrible will happen to me, that this card indicates death looming over my shoulder, and that it involves my womb. She warns me to be careful, that she sees blood, and lots of it. She finishes up the rest of the reading, and I ask her when all of this is supposed to happen. She says the reading was cast for about a year. I thank her, my mother and I leave. Fast forward 6 months. I've moved and gotten in my first really serious relationship. I go to the ER with terrible abdominal pain. Am treated like shit, sent home and advised to take some Motrin. I black out, split my head open, come back to the ER. Turns out I've lost half my body's volume of blood from a ruptured ovarian cyst that didn't stop bleeding. I get stitched up, have emergency laparoscopic surgery, and a blood transfusion. If I hadn't split my head open in the fall and come back to the ER, I would have been dead within an hour or two. I still don't know what to think. It could be a wild coincidence, but I really wish I could remember the rest of the stuff the psychic told me. I made friends with a German international student in my math class last year named Emil. About 2 weeks later she just disappears. I asked my classmates and teacher where she was and nobody else remembered her, and the teacher said that there was nobody on the class list named Emil. When I was younger, my grandma brought me back from a tribe in Canada a very nice dream catcher. She gave it to me when I visited her, and we put it in a box for me to carry back home. I left her house and got in the car, 10 feet from the house. I wanted to look at it again, but it was gone. I walked back to her place and checked everywhere. It had not fallen out of the box, it was just gone, nowhere to be found. It's been years and we still have no clue what happened to it. It's not unexplainable, but a little creepy and just happened a few weeks ago. I woke up in the middle of the night thinking of my old boss. I had worked for him for 21 years. Good guy, and I always had a lot of respect for him. I started thinking about him, wondering how he and his family were. We would run into each other from time to time, but I hadn't seen him in a while. His home phone number even popped into my mind, having called him there numerous times. That day at work, I get a forwarded email from my current employer because she knew I worked for him. He had passed away on Saturday. Very eerie. I was on the phone with my boss. He was in Dubai at that time. He asked me 3-4 questions. I replied. Then he asked me the first question again, exactly with the same wording, same tone as the first time. I thought, okay, whatever, maybe the connection is not perfect and he wants to repeat. Then he asked second question exactly the same way as the first time. Then third question and fourth. At that time I started to feel a bit surreal. And guess what happened then? Yes, he asked the first question exactly same way. I started to feel like the world around me is moving. I freaked out and just hang up. I still have no explanation of that. Afterwards I tried to carefully ask the guy about what he heard. He told me that at some point we just disconnected. I did not risk to ask my boss if he really asked 4 questions 3 times in a row, but I seriously doubt that. That still puzzles me. You ever hear about how it's not the house but the person? My sister is that person. Weird shit happens around her, shadows in her room, knocks and thumps when she isn't home to make them, heavy footsteps and thumps in the attic, things falling down, and something freaky happened involving her that my mom still refuses to speak of even though it happened nearly a decade ago. Because of her I see weird shit in my house, crouching wolf-like figures, people who definitely don't live there, whispering, moaning when no one but me is home. The worst has to be the sudden paralyzing fear that washes over you sometimes. I have more specific stories if anyone is interested, but yeah, my whole life is unexplainable weirdness. Edit. So I asked my mom about the freaky happening and she wouldn't give me much information other than, my sister was about 5 and she started screaming bloody murder and was in extreme pain. They took her to the hospital and nothing was wrong with her, but she was really hurting and there was nothing they could do to fix it. It turns out someone my sister has never met. I couldn't get who it exactly was out of my mom, but it was either a family member or a close friend, was going through an extremely painful ordeal at exactly the same times my sister started screaming and ending when she stopped. My mother wouldn't speak about it anymore after that, so I can only imagine it was horrific. Anywhere I live has a tendency to have weird things happen. I've posted about some things before and I don't usually post anything that could be discounted as sleep related. But the most unsettling thing was the night before I left a particular house. I dreamed that things in the house I was living in were asking me to stay, whispering from inside the walls that they liked the way things were when I was around and that if I stayed there longer they could show me more and send more of us through. I told the house that I was leaving no matter what and woke up to find that the wall had buckled just above where I slept. From the roof down to where my head was there was a defined groove of 3 lines, almost like claw marks. Very glad that was my last day in that place. Years ago, as a poor student, I was trudging home very late. Walking along a sidewalk in an old commercial area, where the shops were right on the property line, and there were verandas/awnings that covered the whole sidewalk. I stop outside one of these shops. It's wooden, and either being renovated, or demolished. Windows are gone, etc. I'm somehow drawn to it, gazing inside where the window had been. It's black, like coal mine black. I suddenly get his intrusive thought, that it would be so easy to just toss something burning in there, and the whole place would just go up. Walked home. A few hours later, taking the bus to Tech. The place is a smoking ruin. I can't imagine what my face looked like. I'm a logical, science-based person, and I've never come up with a satisfactory explanation. The feeling the place could burn was so out of the blue, and so strong. I had no matches or lighter on me, no cash and, as far as I knew, no means to make it happen. I've even wondered if I had some sort of psychotic break, but, as I said, I'm sure I didn't have the means to do so. I had a colleague who I was close friends with. She'd come over for dinner, we'd taken trips together, ate lunch every day. One day she called in sick. I stopped by after work to check on her. She was pale and her eyes were sunken in. She didn't even open the door all the way. I asked if she was okay, but she screamed at me to get out, hurled a dish at my head, and just kept shouting unintelligibly until I'd driven off. That night she went missing and nobody heard from her again. Not even her husband. She just disappeared. Police searched for her and everything. By far one of the weirder things to ever happen to me, and the start of my locking my doors and windows every night. Two things both when I was a kid. One night I was lying awake facing my bedroom wall. Middle of the night, and I felt the most distinguishable feeling of someone poking me in the back. It was just one poke. I froze in fear to freaked out to turn around. I just kept pretending I was asleep. I was in the top bunk, my brother in the bottom bunk. I would have heard him stand up on his mattress to reach me that high, but I didn't hear anything. Still gives me the chills. Another time, bright and sunny day. I was outside playing with my friends, you know, things kids used to do, when I suddenly got a bad headache. It was so bad I walked home to tell my mom. Just as I was about to open my front door, I let out this massive fart. And boom, headache gone just like that. Turned around and met up with my friends again. Weird shit. Crossing the road after I had a detention after school, so I was on my own. Just as I started to cross, it felt like something pulled the handle of my backpack, and pulled me down. I turned round really pissed off, thought I was about to get mugged or something, and a Subaru Impreza drove past at about 80 miles per hour. I'm not religious and into the supernatural whatsoever, but that's the one thing that plays of my mind when things like this get mentioned, because I can't explain it at all. No two ways about it, I would have died. I moved a year ago, and whenever I stayed up past 12 at my new house, I'd hear some low, droning hum every night. I lived out in the middle of nowhere, so it couldn't be a car engine, and when I'd go out and look into the sky, there were no airplanes, just that hum. Only me and my father could hear it. I moved away a few weeks ago for college, and since then the hum has stopped. I was on vacation with a friend in North Carolina, and my parents were back home in Ohio. I wasn't sick, but one night I was suddenly and overwhelmingly nauseous and vomited blood, then went to bed. I woke up to a voicemail from my dad, really upset, telling me my mom was in the ER and to call him ASAP. She had internal bleeding and they didn't know the cause, but she discovered it around 11 p.m., which was when I got sick. My girlfriend came home one day to find a huge bucket of hummus in her fridge. Over a gallon of hummus with no explanation. No one in her household bought it. I didn't, she didn't, her neighbors didn't. Everyone was equally as confused, especially since there was nothing to eat the hummus with, like a giant bag of pita chips or something. I was driving home on a well-lit, very popular road at about 11:30 at night. My neighborhood has an unlit straight road that you have to travel down to get to. This straight road branches off the main road. I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw the silhouette of what looked like some guy chasing after my car. The street lights from the main road lit the background up enough to see him. I only say him because of the height and build of the silhouette. It was too dark to actually see the gender. This man/woman appeared to be hauling complete ass. I'm talking dead on Usain Bolt sprint. I turned my car left into my neighborhood from the straight road and waited for a few seconds. Nothing. No one came around the corner. I backed up and turned right back onto the straight road to take a look. The straight road was empty. There's some woods on one side of the road, so I opened my window to see if I couldn't hear movement in the trees or anything like that, but I heard nothing. There's a good amount of homeless people here, so I figure it was just some crazy homeless guy, but who knows. I had a football coach back in high school who was also one of my teachers for a semester. He told us one story that freaked us all out pretty bad. He had a coaching job at a small college in Montana when he was a lot younger and newly married. He said that after practice one evening, he was making his long commute home, and the route ran alongside just fields and fields of hay, grain, Whatever, since it was late summer/early fall, it wasn't even approaching dark yet. His car was an old beat-up truck with just a bench seat. Anyway, he's driving along when he sees a hitchhiker on the shoulder. This being back in the day and in small-town Montana, my teacher pulled over to let the guy in without a second thought. The man was described as wearing a really old, outdated style of suit, not quite a zoot suit, but styled in a similar, baggy way. He also had a big, stylish hat. This guy looked like he was out of the 40s, and sort of like a pimp. My teacher thought it was weird that he was so overdressed, it being super hot out. But maybe that was the only clothing he had, so the guy gets in next to my teacher without a word. Teacher asks him where he needs to go, and the guy just points forward. Teacher drives on. Later, my teacher tried talking to the guy, just trying to make simple conversation, but the guy wouldn't speak or even acknowledge him. He just pulled his hat down like he was sleeping. Out of nowhere, the guy just tips up his hat, looks out the window, and says, "Stop the car now." My teacher pulls over and lets him out, not wanting to offend a possibly crazy man. The guy stands on the side of the road for a second, and then at a dead sprint, just runs off into the field beside the road, until my teacher couldn't see him anymore. Granted, the crop was fairly tall. He waits there for a while, thinking maybe the guy had the runs or something and didn't want to shit next to the road. After a long enough wait, my teacher gets back in the truck and starts to accelerate back onto the road. The thing about really old trucks is that they don't accelerate very fast. As my teacher got back onto the road, he looked in his rearview mirror to check for a safe merge, but there wasn't a car in sight. What there was the hitchhiker, on all fours like an animal, running, crawling, after the truck at an inhuman speed. Meanwhile, my teacher is beginning to fishtail as he attempts to go faster. The whole time his eyes glued on the mirror, watching the man chase after his car. Eventually, he was able to get up to speed and lost sight of the guy in his mirror. When he was able to stop at a gas station to use a payphone, he called his wife at home to tell her the story, and to lock up the house. She thinks he's just messing with her, and he had been talking to her coworker about the hitchhiker. When he asks why she would think that, apparently at her office in the town she worked in, one of her coworkers told her a story of the exact same thing happening to them. And it is a well-known urban legend in that town. She thought it was just folks playing with the new girl at work, who had to drive home alone at night. Anyways, my teacher assured her that he was not lying, and she evidently believes him and can vouch for her side of the story, because she showed up to one of our fundraisers and I asked her about it. So yeah, now I just avoid lonely roads in Montana. A lot of you are asking where this happened. I don't think he ever actually told us. But for some reason, I'm leaning towards the northwestern part of Montana. At least that's where I pictured it in my mind. Sorry I can't be of further help. He told us this story quite a long time ago. This happened while I was at an amusement park several hours away from home with a group of friends. We were walking to the next ride and this man that looked to be in his 50s stopped in front of us, looked me in the eyes, and shouted my name. This was especially weird considering my name is incredibly uncommon, and I didn't mishear. All my friends heard it too. After holding eye contact for 4 more long seconds, he starts walking away, looking around, shouting Aaron. Which isn't my name. Not too crazy, but it freaked me out. I was stuck in traffic. Then out of nowhere this homeless guy came up to my car and kept motioning and pointing at the front of my car. At first I didn't get what he was doing, but then I realized he noticed that my headlights were turned off. I thanked him and soon after decided to take a deserted not well lit road back home. It was pitch black with no cars, just me on the road. Then after 20 minutes or so of driving I had this inexplicable urge to switch lanes. It consumed me. I didn't really get why, since no one was around so I didn't see the point, but I switched lanes anyway. 5 seconds after I see this guy, who looks like the same homeless man who motioned to me about my headlights, his arms spread towards the sky just standing on the lane that I was on before I switched to the other lane. Well, one time me and my 2 girlfriends were 13 and watching the Scary movies alone late at night in a giant old house that belonged to my friend's nan. Tensions were high and we were also irritable with each other. There was a vibe to that night I just can't explain. We were fighting and yelling and then all had to use the bathroom within like 1 minute of each other. We all discovered we had just started out periods. At the exact same time. Girls are scary. Let me preface this story with this. I have a good friend named Melanie that has blonde hair and drives a red car. I pulled into Smoothie King and parked my car. I was listening to a song from Ren, so I was waiting for it to finish when a person pulled up in a silver car and parked opposite me in the parking lot. I could see the car in my rearview mirror. A younger woman stepped out of the car moments later. She had brown hair and was carrying a purse. For whatever reason, my mind being slightly distracted from the music playing, I said to myself, "Oh, Melanie is here." Then just after that thought crossed my mind, I immediately said, "What? No. That doesn't even look like Melanie. Obviously Melanie has blonde hair and she definitely drives a red car." I dismissed those sequence of events and went into Smoothie King. This brown-haired woman was standing in line, and just as I stepped in behind her, the lady behind the counter asked her, "Can I have a name for your order please?" And the brown-haired woman replied, "Melanie." When I was in the 2nd grade, I was on my way up to bed. The door to my bedroom was closed to keep in the cool air from the AC. I shared the room with my brother, who wasn't in bed yet. I opened the door, and just beside our bunk beds, parallel to me standing there, a really dark and black shadowy figure quickly darted from the side of the beds to behind them towards the wall. I swear there was no one else in the upstairs besides me. Literally the scariest thing that's ever happened to me to this day. My best friend and her boyfriend died in a car accident when we were teenagers. I spent the day/night at our other friend's house. We were the three musketeers from kindergarten to senior year, so it was pretty rough. I remember pretty much crying constantly. I finally managed to cry myself to sleep. I wake up in the early morning, totally panicked that I wasn't crying and therefore that meant I wasn't grieving. And I suddenly sensed that my dead best friend was sitting on the bed next to me, and I hear her voice in my head telling me, "Stop being such a fucking loser, it's okay not to cry. Everything will be okay." So, I'm lying there, quietly freaking out, and my other friend, who is in the other bed on the other side of the room, and who I think is sound asleep, suddenly says everything will be okay. And then we both go back to sleep. I wake up in the morning and realize that this all happened pretty much 24 hours after her death, and the friend across the room had the exact same experience, that she woke up sensing that our dead friend was on the bed with her, and saying goodbye. We spoke of it once, that next morning, and never again. I remember one time I was watching 2 horror movies, one after another. I was midway through the second movie. It was around 3 a.m. when someone patted me on the shoulder. Hard. I jumped, turned around and found no one. Creepy. I scooted away to the other end of the couch and then I proceeded to continue watching the movie. It was weird and creepy, but I'd just brushed it off as nothing. Looking back, I was lucky nothing happened for the next hour. A few years ago my sister and I were leaving an event we had helped my dad with around the holidays. As we reached the final stretch of road to get home, we see a Jeep pulled over on the side of the road, and a pickup truck behind it. In front of the Jeep's headlights was a buck of about average size. It was frozen in place. Its leg was bent at an odd angle and a huge amount of drool was coming from its mouth. A guy gets out of the pickup holding a rifle just as we drive by. It was clear the Jeep struck the deer by accident and they were going to put it down. But I had never seen anything like it and it still feels weird thinking about it. I never heard the gun go off, but I think my sister decided to floor it after we passed by specifically so I wouldn't hear it. When I was really young, must have been under 4 or 5 years old, my family took a trip, and I think it was somewhere in the Middle East. That's my guess, because the men I remember were wearing white robes with a red, checkered scarf around their heads. One minute I'm frolicking beside a beach, zigzagging around palm trees, the next minute, a man grabs me and carries me over to his group of 15 or 20 friends. They line up in 2 rows, with the second one kneeling, because we're taking a picture. They try to make me smile for the camera by making weird faces and squishing mine, but I'm screaming because I just want to run back to my parents. I was separated from them by perhaps 15 feet at most, but I don't know if I've panicked that hard ever again in my life. They let me go immediately after the picture was taken. When I was 16 I lived in Okinawa with my dad. The way my room was set up, I had my bed in a corner and there was an outlet on the wall that it was pushed up against that I had my phone charger plugged into. One night I plugged my phone in and went to sleep like normal, and at like 3 a.m. I woke up startled. I checked my phone and it wasn't charging and I thought that was odd, so I went to pick up the cord to make sure it was still plugged in and it was coiled up sitting on my bed. And then I looked up and my bedroom door was wide open. I always slept with it closed. I didn't even bother plugging my phone back in or closing the door. I just closed my eyes and pretended like it didn't happen. When I asked my dad in the morning if he had come into my room last night, he just gave me a very confused no. Years ago I moved into a relatively new apartment complex way on the edge of gigantic city. On two sides of the property it was still woods. Weird shit happened while I lived there, so mostly I heard weird sounds and stuff inside, but I figured that was normal for apartments. The laundry room door wouldn't stay closed. Would pop open randomly. There was no way to pull it open once closed without turning the knob, but the door would open on its own. Also would wake up at night and find all the lights in the common areas on, all but in the two bedrooms. Anyway, one day I came home and, as a girl who grew up in gigantic city is apt to do, I habitually bolted the door behind me as usual. Husband was at work and had just dropped kids at a friend's house, so I was alone. As I crossed the living room to my bedroom, I saw in the reflection of some wall pictures a man walked behind me, kind of perpendicular to my path. Tall, cowboy hat, white guy. I spun around. No one there. Yikes. Told my friend about it. She said I should talk to her mom. Talked to her mom, who said her friend was victim of a serial killer, and when caught the killer reported burying 10 bodies in a particular bit of woods on the edge of gigantic city, but only 7 bodies were ever recovered. She had obsessively followed the case in the papers because of her friend. That woods? Right where our apartment complex had been built, part of the woods freshly cleared for that purpose, 3 years earlier. Was retelling this to a friend earlier today. I once had a balloon. After several weeks, it had deflated enough to just sit in the middle of the room, at about handheld height. At this point we started telling my little sister it was being held by Joanna the ghost. A bit of backstory about Joanna: when I was stripping the wallpaper from my bedroom, a couple of months before this incident, we found a lot of blood on the walls, leading from the window, and weirdly, to the attic. This was never explained. A well-timed Sweeney Todd song on my iPod led to the resulting ghost being named Joanna. Then, the balloon began to move. It would track round the room, following the path from the window, to the attic, to the door, continuously. It did this for days, and was put down to convection currents. A very reasonable explanation. Convection currents was also the excuse we used when Mom found the balloon under her desk. We put it back into the room, and then watched as it traced its way, beautifully at the right height to be held by a small child, out the bedroom, across the landing, down the stairs, through the hall, through the lounge, to the far end, where it tucked itself under the desk. Watched by my entire family. Mom just popped the balloon, and told us off for a trick or we didn't understand how we could do. My 8-year-old sister couldn't sleep for days as now we didn't know where Joanna was. We have never been allowed a helium balloon since. Another fun fact: before she even started floating around the room, my dog came into my bedroom one day, and refused to enter, growling at the balloon. This was probably a natural dog reaction to an unexplained magical floating ball. Also, none of us believed, or still quite believe in ghosts. But I have never found another excuse for this bizarre behavior, other than some very precise convection currents, and the balloon being just at the optimum density to float at the Goldilocks zone. Sitting next to this crazy guy on a plane a few days ago. He was on his own, and at the beginning of the flight he started talking to himself and was muttering "bomb, check the cargo, get off the plane," etc. He also kept calling someone from his phone. It shit me up at first, but then after a while I realized he was drunk and probably mentally ill, because he sat there listening to his Nokia ringtone for about 30 minutes, picking his nose and stroking a random baby. I went to visit our small family cemetery plot on the anniversary of my grandmother's death. I'm the only family member who goes there. Everyone else lives over 1,200 miles away. When I arrived, someone had planted 2 beautiful, expensive shrubs, and there were fresh flowers on her grave. No one's been there for years, and the caretaker said that he saw no signs of planting. Permission is required before doing so. It's an unsolved mystery. I called around, but no one has a clue. Something unexplainable takes control of me to save my life. Throughout my life, doing 110 miles per hour on a dual carriageway around a long left-hand turn, it just passed, so I was obviously the best driver in the world, right? And without my brain making me do it, I moved into the outside lane, as I thought, what the fuck? How? Why? I noticed a broken down van in the inside lane. Obviously I'd have swerved to avoid it and crashed hard, But luckily there was something that steered me outside well before the van was even in eyeshot, running down the country roads, and I shit you not, something full-blown pushed me / drop kicked me off of the road and onto a grass verge just before I reached a junction, cross junction off the main road I was running on. Car flies over the crossroads right in front of me, thinking it was his right of way and would have wiped me out had I not stopped running. Yesterday, mountain biking with my army mates, cruising down a flat smooth road between trails. And my bike was laid down from underneath me. As if something just slowly pushed it over. We all stopped because I'd stacked it, but no one laughed because no one understood how it had happened. It was impossible. Right as a bus took a very wide berth around the corner we were going down. Whoever the hell you're, ghosty ghost. Nice one, bro. Keep up the good work. Ordered a pepperoni pizza with bacon for delivery. Guy drops off pizza, I pay and he leaves. I go to check on the pizza and see it's a buffalo chicken pizza, so I call and tell them. Delivery guy comes back, and before he hands me my correct pizza he asks if he can check the pizza to make sure that I wasn't lying. I say yes. He opens the box and there in front of my eyes is a pepperoni pizza with bacon. My friend Kelly had sold their old house, but the old one was still in renovations, so they were going to be living in an apartment for a few months. My friend Amanda lives in a huge old Victorian house and volunteered that Kelly could store some things in a spare room in the attic. Amanda had always claimed her house was haunted. I helped Kelly move her things into storage, spare furniture that wouldn't fit in the apartment, Christmas decorations, baby toys saved for her second child, etc. It was roasting hot that day, the attic wasn't air-conditioned, Kelly was 3 months pregnant, and by the time we unloaded the U-Haul and got everything upstairs, we were exhausted. The room we were putting things in was maybe 10 foot by 10 foot with a surprisingly high ceiling, unfinished with exposed studs, and windowless. There was a ton of stuff, so everything was tightly stacked, everything inside. The last box moved, we high-fived, a job well done, then realized we had made a mistake. There were 2 lights in the room, single bulbs that turned on and off by a pull chain. The first was close enough I could reach to turn it off on my tiptoes. But the second was in the back corner, 8 feet of boxes and furniture in the way. We sort of cursed at ourselves, and decided we would take a 5-minute break to drink some water before we moved things to reach the other bulb. As we turned, we hear a caw click, and the attic got darker. I turned around and the light was out, the cord actually swinging like someone had pulled it. Kelly and I stand there gobsmacked for a moment, then decide to just leave the attic in a hurry. 6 months pass and Kelly and her husband Dan go to get the stuff out of storage as they had moved into the new house. Kelly had told Dan about the light, but he had mostly made fun of it. They get there after dark, homeowner Amanda helping out, and Dan is kind of being a jerk about the light. He points it out in the back corner with his flashlight and is making spooky noises, etc. When caw click. The chain is swinging and the back light is on, still feet away from where anyone could reach. When they got the room empty, Dan tried to figure out the trick, but it's a super simple fixture, very basic wiring. Nothing attached to it, no way of turning it off and on other than the base. Months later, there was a Christmas party at Aminata's house and half a dozen people ended up in the attic to examine the light bulb and try every combination of turn the close light on, then jump on the floorboards and close the door to make it spontaneously turn off and on by itself to no avail. Taking a poop in a small bathroom with a sink next to the toilet, happened to look underneath, don't ask, and noticed an eye-touch recording anyone that walked into the bathroom. I'm not a huge believer in the supernatural, so this was probably just a horrible coincidence, but it freaked me out nonetheless. I worked with a guy named Rich when I was 20, he was the same age. He was a super friendly guy and I became friends with him outside of work. We hung out on the weekends, getting drunk and bullshitting with other friends and coworkers. He would always leave these funny cartoons of my supervisor as a cow on post-it notes in my desk. Anyways, one night I had a dream that I was at work and our administrator called us all into the kitchen. I worked at a nursing home, and told us that Rich had died. Everyone was crying, it was super sad. Woke up in the morning and just went on my way to work. About 30 minutes into work the admin calls everyone to the nurse's station on the intercom. We get up there and she announces that Rich had died in a car wreck the night before. It was horrible and surreal. He was a great guy who went too soon and I treasure my good memories with him over a decade later. I swear I know when people are about to die. I remember in 8th grade watching my friend sing at a talent show, then having this immense sense of dread and thinking that she wouldn't make it to high school graduation. I wrote it in my diary. Sure enough, a month before graduation she got murdered by a forced overdose. A friend shoved a needle in her arm. She didn't want to do it, died as friend ran away. The last time I hugged my uncle, same thing happened. Immense sense of dread, and that it was the last time I'd see him. He had a stroke and got lock-in syndrome, so terrifying. After 4 years of suffering he died. I never saw him again. My great uncle, same thing. I remember shaking his hand thinking of how warm it was, and sure enough, he died. I hate it. I only have 4 unexplainable/paranormal stories. This one I wasn't even there for, just got the crazy confused texts when it happened. My dad gave my brother a ride to the airport before work. Dad then goes to work, gets home and my brother calls. So, 8 hours has passed since my dad dropped off my brother. My brother had about an hour before his flight and a 4-hour flight, so at the time of the call, he should have been in California for 3 hours. However, my brother is telling stories about what he did that day and the night before. He seemed to think he was in California for a day and a half. Furthermore, he uploaded a ton of pictures not long afterwards, showing him in California during the night. It was still daylight in California. My brother's friends verify he had gotten there the day before, but my dad swears he dropped him off that morning and the tickets were for that morning. Somehow, my brother gained an extra day. I already talked about this on AskReddit. Doors closing or opening randomly and couch moving while I was sitting on it. Also, weird noises. Shit almost drove me insane for a week or so, but I had witnesses so I wasn't imagining anything. Then it stopped. When I was in basic I had a dream about a classroom. It was math. The professor had a few equations on the board, and a girl from my high school sat next to me in a dress I had never seen. After basic I went to my first semester in school and relived it, moment for moment, including high school girl in that same dress which it turns out she had bought during the summer while I was at basic. I've fallen off the trampoline face first only to slowly spin up to land on my feet at the last moment. I calmly have a song off my 850+ song playlist pop into my head just for it to play next, while on random. Now I just get to hope my other dream, I've had many, but only one other felt like the first, can come true. I was divorcing. I had no plan to go back, neither my ex. But once, on my motorcycle I was wondering if my future ex-wife was still loving me. While driving, I started to think about ways to know her feelings. Because I was on my motorcycle, I felt, oh well, what if I had a bike accident? Then, I felt, hell no, too risky. Then I felt, what about an appendicitis? Not lethal, doesn't hurt much, still a problem when you're 40, this way I would know if she still cared about me. It made me laugh and I forgot the whole thing. 3 weeks later I ended up in intensive care. Surgeon had to take out my appendix. To this day, I can't say if my brain was telling me something, if my brain decided to make this happen or if it's just pure coincidence, since I try to avoid such questions. This happened when I was like 10 and I can't explain it. I've never done drugs or anything and it makes no sense. I was talking to one of my friends in the woods behind my house and all of a sudden I was lying down on my back and my friend was shaking me. He said your eyes went super big and you just started screaming in this hoarse voice. It didn't even sound human and you just fell over. Apparently I was out for a good minute. It still scares the shit out of me to think about it. I had been working straight for over 48 hours as I was on a deadline. While driving home at night after I finished I fell asleep. I was alone in a brand new car. Seconds after I drifted out I woke up to a loud bang. Like someone had slammed the door on the outside with something. At the same moment the light inside the car turns on and the sound you hear when you forget to fasten your seatbelt goes off. I immediately woke up and stopped the car. Thought I had hit something or something had been thrown at the car. I inspected the car and everything was normal. I couldn't find anything wrong at all. All doors had been closed and the seatbelt was fastened. A brand new car and not a tiny scratch on it. See nothing in the surrounding area that could have caused this and quite frankly couldn't even think of an explanation. Like someone/something wanted me to wake up at this moment to save me from harm. Nothing similar ever happened again in this car so this is one that still bugs me today. This happened to my next door neighbor. He told me one evening he was sitting in his room when the doorbell rang. He answered it and a girl was at the door. She asked for his housemate and without thinking much of it, He directed her to his housemate's room, then went to the kitchen to make dinner, then back to his room. A few hours later, he asked his housemate where the girl was. His housemate, along with all the other housemates, all said they never saw a girl. Where my friend's bedroom is, he would have heard her leave too, but he never heard her leave. To this day, nobody knows who that girl was. I don't really believe in ghosts, but I was sitting in my old house smoking a joint while on YouTube. Something felt weird, like just plain off. A 2-liter I got to have with friends, really all for me, flew from the table straight onto the floor. There was no perceivable way it could have been moved. It just happened. I got my pot and noped out of there for the day. I work at a naval hospital. A lot of things that I see/feel/hear are creepy/weird, although not entirely unexplainable. Rumor has it that on the 3rd floor there's a ghost called the Lady in White who stands and looks at the memorial wall that has all of the Medal of Honor recipients on it. I've never personally seen her, but when I used to work on the 3rd floor I would feel this very off-putting breeze that always seemed to be there. I'd hear random footsteps running down the hall, go out and there's no one there. Lights flickering from time to time. Nothing that can't be explained away, but sometimes you just get that weird feeling that something isn't right. In the 6th grade my friend and I were getting into mischief and throwing snowballs at cars after school one day. It was about 5 p.m., and we were throwing them from a catwalk/alleyway that was about 50 or 60 yards away from his house. The alleyway overlooks a main road going through my town from about 80 feet above. The cars were lined up in traffic, about 50 cars deep at a red light. We each hit the same car, one that was near the back of the line. We then turned around, and ran full speed back to his house. As we were walking up his driveway, the stop sign intersection at the end of his street came into view, about another 50 yards away. The car that we hit was turning onto the street and speeding towards us. This, as far as my friend and I can figure it, is impossible. The distance he had to travel just to make it to his intersection was about 45 cars, moving slowly on a wet and snowy evening. He then would have had to turn right, drive about half a mile up a hill, turn right into a subdivision, and then turn right, left, and right again at various intersections just to make it to my friend's street. The distance he traveled in the same time we sprinted 50 or 60 yards just makes absolutely no sense. And this is all provided he knew where to go, and my friend says he's not a neighbor, nor did he ever see him there again after years of living there. We ran inside his house and hid behind some couches in the living room, peering through the curtains to see if he had spotted us on our way into his house. Sure enough, he had. A really tall, but otherwise normal-looking guy from what I remember got out and ran to the front door, and immediately began pounding on the door, demanding that we come outside. We hoped he would just leave, but at that moment my friend's mom came home from work early and saw this stranger parked in her driveway, pounding on her door. She got out of the car, and we could see them yelling at each other. She demanded we come outside and give her an explanation. This man said you threw snowballs at his car. What do you have to say? We were terrified, so we lied. We denied throwing any snowballs whatsoever. Cowardly, I know. But we were kids and this guy was scaring the hell out of us. Eventually, my friend's mom asked him to describe the color of our jackets, which he did incorrectly. He then argued that we threw the snowballs from a completely different location from where we actually did. Like, from the bottom of the hill on the road. Made absolutely no sense at all. We focused our denial and lies on those two truths. We were wearing blue jackets, not red, and we were on the catwalk, not the road down below. Eventually he left and we miraculously didn't get in too much trouble. I think my friend's mom knew we had done something, but seeing how passionately we denied parts of his story, I think she thought other kids were involved. We didn't see anybody else, and had an absolutely clear view of everything from above. My friend and I still talk about it to this day. How on earth did he find us so fast, and why didn't his explanation make any sense? I would even be willing to concede that somehow, there were other kids throwing snowball at cars at the exact same time that we didn't see, even though I'm sure that didn't happen. But we cannot explain how the car made the drive to my friend's street so fast. It still baffles us both. A few things have happened in my lifetime. I had a dream once that my father died. I didn't know how he died in my dream, but I sat outside the door to his flat crying and wanting to get inside, but I didn't have a key. Someone came by and passed me a key, and I let myself in. I just curled up in my dad's bed crying. I woke up crying my eyes out and felt horrible about it all day. 5 months later my dad died. Worst thing I've ever been through. I'm scared of having another dream like that. I was at work early in the morning, around the time the sun rises. I was assigned my task and headed off to my area. The area I was assigned is in a relatively remote area and surrounded by a massive forest. As I was getting close to my destination I heard this loud screaming/wailing coming out of the woods. It lasted for a few minutes and I recorded some of the audio. The audio I have is somewhat distorted because my phone couldn't handle the volume. I had a literal crackhead living next door to me while I was in college. She died, and for a week or so after that cabinet doors would open up by themselves while I sat there, scared shitless. They would also close by themselves. Completely silently, like my life was a TV that someone had muted. Scared out of me. It was a pretty bad week. It wasn't unsettling, it was more unexplainable. I was in a highway one day sleeping on the back of the car where out of nowhere I woke up and saw the 3 different cars my parents had throughout their life, Toyota RAV4, Nissan X-Trail and Toyota Sienna, go back to back, and while they're not that uncommon, they're not the most common cars either. I was completely baffled. Unsettling but easily explainable. When I was young, think 5 or 6, me and my brother shared a room and had bunk beds. I slept on the bottom bunk and one night I woke up and saw the shadowy outline of a dog, German Shepherd-ish, just lying in my room in a way that made me feel like it was watching me. I was so scared to even blink. Eventually, I fell back asleep and when I woke up in the morning I somehow concluded that it was a mixture of my night light and the shape of the beanbag chair across from my bed that created the figure. It's one of those memories you look back at and think, how did I ever believe that? But remember the sheer terror you felt at the time. Needless to say I'm more of a cat person nowadays. A close second was walking the trash bin down to the curb around 11 p.m. one night and hearing what sounded like a woman shrieking from the backyard. I ran back to my house so quick to get my brother and a flashlight to figure out what it was. He had heard it too. Turned out that a fox had caught a rabbit and had let out a loud cry that sounded extremely human-like. About 9 years ago my family and another family we are friends with were at our cabin in Wisconsin for New Year's weekend. It was 9 p.m. and me, 9 years old, my sister, 6 years old, my family friend's daughter and her friend, both in high school, were all down at the lake edge sitting in the snow relaxing after all the sledding we did while the parents were up in the cabin talking and drinking. We were all in a clearing but to the left and right of us there were woods. My sister was looking up at the stars while I was sitting near her looking into the woods and the family friend's daughter and her friend were sitting away from us talking about something. It was then that I noticed a snowball come out of the woods towards me and my sister. I had never been more scared in my life. After all, who is in the woods at night throwing a snowball at some kids? However, after 2 seconds I realize it's not a snowball, it's a softly glowing sphere and it's not falling to the ground, it just keeps floating through the air directly over me and my sister and then back into the woods on the opposite side of the clearing we were in. I was completely speechless and said nothing but then my sister exclaimed, "Oh my gosh, I just saw a shooting star." Since she was looking up at the sky and the orb flew over her she thought it was a shooting star. She was too little to realize that the orb was far too big to be a shooting star, but she now knows it wasn't a shooting star. The family friend turned and said something like, "Oh man, you're so lucky, I haven't ever seen one before," completely oblivious to what just happened. I was still in shock about everything so I just sat there quietly not saying a word. I later told my parents who didn't believe until a few years later because they thought I was just being imaginative, which I would have probably thought too had my sister not also seen it. That was my one experience with the paranormal. I was going up the stairs in the metro during a really quiet time, which is rare. I was going up pretty fast and I feel something grab the back of my pants. It was like someone hooked their fingers in my jeans and it actually pulled me back a step. I turned around immediately and no one was there. I was too high up the stairs for someone to have done it from below and no one else was on the staircase. This only happened a few weeks ago. Went out drinking with a bunch of friends to our local bar, about 2 miles from my house. Started taking shots at 9 p.m. or so. At 1:30 or so my friends lost track of me when they were arranging rides for the worst off of us. I don't remember anything from 11 o'clock until 7 a.m. when I woke up naked in my garage in my car. My phone, dead battery, wallet, and keys were on the driver's side floor. There was dried blood on me and I didn't have any wounds. There was no damage to my car. No one saw me talking to anyone outside our group all night. No one was reported missing for at least a week. There were no police reports of any assaults or accidents. My cloths never turned up anywhere. It's been several years and the only thing that has come of it is I don't take shots anymore. It was probably 10 years ago, but I remember being in our barn and seeing smoke from this little wooded area about 200 feet away. I walk over to it and there is a small fire starting out of nowhere. It wasn't overly dry out, I remember, like early spring, so it was sorta creepy and unexplainable. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.